It's the beginning with Stephen King. The point is with Stephen King is that for any reader that his mother tongue is not English, it's very hard for him to read it because his writing is so American to the point that sometimes you might get to wonder what does he mean by that? What does he mean by the sentence or that one? But once you give yourself a try, because okay, I know English very well, and because I can read English, I tried the simplest books by Stephen King, and it got me into reading him. Then after a while, when you get used to his style, you get to know that okay, there are some books I can read for him. One of these books is this one, Lisey's story. When I first picked up the book, it caught my attention because it's the story of the wife of a certain writer. Because those people in the dark know a lot about the people in the light, but they don't get the chance to say it. But it turns out while reading the book that this is not the story Lisey will tell us. So it's not really a story about her, it's a story for her. So it's a story for the people who mean so much to the main character. So in this case, Lisey is the wife of the writer Scott Landon, and he dies. But after his death, she's still haunted by her husband because she really loves him. The point is, why was she the light in his life? And what's the darkness in his life, and what's the source of the darkness in his life? But here comes to the question. While facing every single thing she had to deal with after her husband's death, still she gets back to the story about her husband, and she knows that she doesn't know a lot of things about Scott, her husband. But Lisey still goes on and on in the life that draws energy from the memory of her dead husband. But the more she discovers things about her husband, the more things get clearer in her mind. But here we get to the story, to the main idea that there's a story he left for her. Stephen King, through the story of Scott, the author, came to discuss one main idea that we have a lot of questions about. Does this fiction come from suffering? Is talent born out of misery? Is the real cause for writing to escape this world? Or every single writer keeps writing in order to hide the true story behind his writing in general? What got him into writing? Is it that we said it's escape literature? From the point of view of the reader, escape literature is for him to escape this reality. Sometimes we say that we escape the reality by reading the book. But readers know that we go for this type of literature, whether we call it escape literature or not, because of two things. First, it helps us face this reality, because if you look at the book and read it, the books themselves discuss our deepest fears. Sometimes things we fear to face, here they might show us how to overcome it. So we might identify ourselves with some of the characters in the books in order to find exactly the true solution and the true power, sometimes the hope to face our worst fears. And that's where horror fiction comes. It's about facing our worst fears presented in front of us. But is the author, according to the book over here, is writing his fiction in order to escape the one true dark tale of his life? Do we as writers come up and write stories just in order to escape and not face that old story that we don't want to talk about? Or the idea that this kind of story is the story that helps us face the problem that we have. So we keep writing stories in order to beat the old dark one. And at the end, when Lisey here sits down and reads the story her husband wrote for her, here comes the trouble. Do we already have the talent and we need misery to push it out of us, to get it out in order to write and express ourselves? And what are we trying to express? Are we trying to express our sadness or our love, or just imagine having a different life other than the one we already have? Is that the purpose of writing? Maybe it will be different from the point of view of the reader than the point of view of the one writing the book. But what I know for now is this is a big story of someone writing in order to overcome his problem. And as all the time, okay, he writes very big books, I know that. Very long stories and tales of people. Because he keeps describing every single thing. The description in Stephen King books is the first thing that grabs your attention, because he describes every single thing the characters feel or believe in, even why they are doing this or that. And also he dives into the psychology of every character as if building it with you, as if building it bit by bit while reading. And you get this feeling of getting attached to the character. You read a lot about them and it's dangerous because you get attached to them. And once they grow on you, you are really seriously concerned with what happens in the characters with Stephen King book. So to say the truth, I never imagined such a book would get me to such dark secrets of life. That there is a story of suffering behind every writer, even though his character looks looks happy, but what drives him to write is that he doesn't write, he will go crazy. A lot of the writers say if we stop writing, we prefer this will be the last day in our lives. This declaration in itself tells us that writing is more like breathing for writers, not just an expression where they can get the attention of other people or just drive the out of someone. It's another case. It's the case of expressing ourselves, trying to hide behind our stories, or taking these stories as armor for us to fight in our lives in order to survive. So if we stop, we're not going to survive. So is literature going to come out of someone who suffered? And what if a certain person never suffered at all? Would the same type of literature come out? That's different. What the story here discusses is the relationship between family members and the effect the parents have on their kids. The point is, the story of the father and son here literally shows the effect Stephen King wants to show of the parents on their kids. Like, parents are the origin. So if you have good effect on your family, your kid is going to turn different. If you're a bad effect, your kid is going to turn a very bad and broken man inside. Maybe writing stories was the only way here to protect this boy from going crazy. And the man in Scotland took care of the boy by writing him the stories that would make him stay away from the original one, the one that would drive him mad, the story that no kid should know about. So protecting yourself by growing up and writing stories to the boy that was stuck in that moment, in that bloody moment, you got stuck there. Another character will come out, which is the character of the writer in this case. By the way, in other cases, they might be the character of the painter, the character of architect, the character of any other talent that's there to save you. Maybe this book is about the importance of talent and its ability to protect the person who's talented from a very deep and dark story, the story of his life, or the story where at a certain time his life stops. So this time freezing needs another way to move it. Maybe the way here is the book itself. And while she is reading, she gets to remember a lot of things. And this story, the dark one over here, explains a lot of the things about her late husband, Scott Landon. So Lisey has to read this story in order to strengthen the love and get her husband really as an open book. Not once you know, you understand. So once you don't know, you will never understand. So the reason here for writing this book, this whole book, I think, is to show that some characters hide behind the true character of the person that we're facing here. And as long as you don't know why he's doing this and that, and sometimes why they are hurting themselves, it shows from a deep, dark story. And by the way, the kids, as it's shown here, and it shows in psychology, from a psychological point of view, they don't hate the parents when the parents are bad to them. They hate themselves, and they start blaming themselves. And they keep loving their parents no matter what happens. So maybe this book is out of love, but from a different point of view. When love is being destructive, not constructive. Because if you think of it this way, he had to do something. And that thing was because his father told him to do it. But even though he did it out of love for his father, he knows it's wrong. And he blames himself for the result they got to. Is he blaming himself for just doing it? Or he blaming himself for doing the thing too late? Because he lost his brother and father. But what is the dark story behind him? It's in the book here. So this story of Stephen King, yes, you read a lot. Sometimes you find a lot of pages that, okay, I don't need them. Why did you go through all these pages just to build a certain character to show us that at the end? So for any reader for Stephen King, you might feel a little bit bored while reading the book, but then you get interested. Then at the end, all of it comes together as one mosaic, piece by piece, to show you the big portrait that Stephen King is trying to get you to. Because his books look like life, full of detail, rich with colors, full of details. He knows exactly how to dive deep into everyone's feelings. Maybe all this book is written because of one feeling. Maybe the feeling that we're trying to hide. Maybe he's trying to tell you, try to understand the other person. Try to understand the ones who are creative, the artists, the writers. Don't just go and say, yes, they're good or they're bad just because that's it and stop here. Maybe you don't understand the person inside or behind the stories. Maybe it's a way of trying to understand a piece of the human mind and a piece of the human soul at the same time. Maybe it's something about psychology here. And maybe Stephen King is trying to get out one of the dark tales in him by referring to something in reality. Maybe one of the artists found something like this in their lives. And only Stephen King might be the only one. And Stephen King might be the only one who's able to get this type of story out on behalf of every single writer, or maybe on behalf of every single artist who would like to express himself in this way. That's what I can get from reading this book, Stephen King. Lisey's story is a story written for Lisey, but Lisey's story here is the story of hundreds of people like Lisey, or maybe written to hundreds of people like Lisey. Maybe they will have another type of look at their husband's lives. Another case here to face when looking for other stories that would look like it. But in case you didn't find a story like this, make sure this is a reminder of such stories, and we have a lot of them, and that's just one dip in the sea of this type of story. Now, this is my simple review of this book. If you read this book and you want to share your ideas about it, please put that in the comments down below. We can discuss that together. If you would like to read the book, please tell us so we can wait for your opinion. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe in our channel. See you next time.